Inside the Birds is back. What's going on, everybody? Geoff, Mosher, Adam Caplan for another Inside the Birds presented by our friends at Ocean Casino Resort in Atlantic City, the exclusive Jersey Shore resort of Inside the Birds. We are going to finish off our two-part series examining the coaching staff. In the last podcast, we did the offensive staff, their influences, their philosophies, their scheme, and how that's going to impact the 2024 Eagles. And this is going to be a really interesting podcast, Adam. I've been thinking about how we're going to sort of phrase this because in looking at this defensive coaching staff, new staff headed by Vic Fangio, this will be a different type of conversation than Kellen Moore and then even the past two defensive coordinators, Sean Desai and Jonathan Gannon, because with all of these new coordinators, we've talked about who their influences were, where they got their backgrounds. And a lot of times when we talked about these guys, Adam, we're talking about their influences being coaches who have either still in the league or have coached really currently. You know, Gannon was a Zimmer guy and a Fangio, and Kellen Moore, Scott Linehan, Doug Nussmeier, Scott Linehan, and Sean Desai, Mel Tucker, John Fox, Vic Fangio's influences. I mean, his two main influences we'll talk about, the guys he coached under, Jim Morris Sr., right, and Dom Capers have not coached in the NFL in quite a while. So we're going to be talking about the people Vic Fangio has influenced.
Sure.
And not just influences.
Iviro Giro, the D coordinator from Carolina's disciple. I mean, there's so many guys who run a scheme or variances, or guys who've worked for Vic, and they run some of his zone concepts. So yeah, it's fascinating. It really is, and it'll never be as prevalent as the West Coast offense, which, by the way, in recent years has made a monster comeback. That is the offense right now. Defenses are having trouble stopping.
Mm-hmm.
But defensively, Fangio, it's not that they figure it out. It's really a talent issue. If you really want to study and get better context, you have to look at why some of these guys are running some of the Fangio stuff have not done as well. It's strictly, as someone told me, it's personnel based. Some of these, it's if you don't have the personnel, I don't care what scheme you run, you're not going to do well. Or they had an injury problem, or the guy was not, or a couple of them didn't coach with Fangio, but they wanted to run a lot of what he does, and they didn't run it as well. That part I would agree with. That's if you're really digging the weeds and talking some coaches who gave me some background on this stuff. There were a couple guys who just didn't get it, but most of the issues that have happened, as I understand it, it's all not having good enough players, or guys got hurt, or the GM didn't get them the right players for the scheme. Because man, match carry delivers not you. You might think, because of how much success some of these teams have had to run it, it's not easy. It's not as easy as you think. It's not just zone defense. You're taking this one area. It's carrying a guy to a landmark and handing them off. That's not always easy. You got to learn that.
Oh yeah, it takes a lot of discipline. And I think last year, by the way, is a really good example of, Sean Desai was a pretty decent looking defensive coordinator in Chicago. Last year, he couldn't stop. I mean, he had some moments. We've talked about the second half of the Miami game, or the Miami game, the second half of the Rams game. But in general, his defense was often out of place, confused. And a lot of that is also he didn't have a whole lot of talent there in the back end to work with, from the linebackers to the corners to the safeties, and James Bradbury falling off a map to the point where I'm pretty sure even if Vic Fangio, the defensive coordinator last year, would they have been more or less confused? Probably. Would they have been more impactful? Maybe. But I don't think Vic Fangio is a cure-all for what James Bradbury was going through, or Reed Blankenship, not really being a starting safety in this league, or a high echelon starting safety in the league.
Yeah, I would say with Vic, though, see here on what you were saying, sometimes great defensive coordinators, somehow you can't completely cover up a guy who's struggling, but there's some ways. The term is hiding a player. You could maybe reduce how many snaps he has, which they did with Bradbury. We asked them to do less than they were before because they can't handle it, but you think the guy could contribute like that. There's just some things you can do, but man, Bradbury's drop off was so bad. And Cosell, Greg broke him down, and Greg was trying to be as diplomatic as he said. He goes, Eagles can't go forward with Bradbury. They can't.
Right.
As a starter, they can't, because Greg only bases on tape. He doesn't talk about anything else, only what the tape, as he says, tells him. Bradbury fell off so poorly, you couldn't put him out there anymore. That's unfortunate. it's one of the rare drop-offs to go from being a second team All-Pro, and we could debate whether he should have been or not. That's not the point. He was. To getting benched more or less or rotated. Most teams do not rotate their starting corners. Most play almost all, if like a very high percentage, like 90 to 100% of the snaps every game. Most teams don't rotate corners. It's not done.
Right.
So that was bad. So to move this forward here, it's just going to be interesting because I know Fangio knows these players because he was a consultant, as we reported 9 months ago, whatever it was, said he was around the team a lot in 22. I know he's a friend of the team and all that. You and I jokingly saw him in Miami for that joint practice. What the hell is he doing here? You know, it just happened to show up on vacation in Miami when it's sweltering heat.
Yeah, who isn't in Miami in the middle of August?
Exactly. And I remember, man, it was brutal. But
oh man,
so anyway,
people think it's hot right now in the Delaware Valley. And it is, but oh man, that was
their humidity is brutal. Although ours could be. But getting back to this, so. It's really we'll get to start in a minute, but you and I, heck, we had Paul Gunther on, who's now with the Cowboys. Paul broke down his for Patreon. He broke down Vic's defense. He said it's actually just from a conceptual standpoint, it's not. He runs certain basic coverages, but the way that they implement it with the match, carry, and deliver, that's a learned trait. But in terms of coverages, it's very basic. Just overall, whether it's cover 4, 6, 7, whatever it may be, but Paul said that he really has run the same coverages for years. It's just that match, carry, and deliver has become more of a big deal for him in recent years, and we learned some stuff that we weren't quite aware of from a couple coaches who've worked with him before, which is kind of interesting. So we'll get into that in a minute.
Yeah. And then, when we really get into the weeds a little bit, we'll also discover, unlike a lot of the coordinators, offense, defensive, that we talked about, Vic has coached so long that his original defenses, maybe even some people remember in San Francisco, are not the defenses that he's been running lately. He made an adjustment in his career for a specific reason that we'll get into, and that adjustment has worked well for him, and he is stuck with it, and it has started to proliferate around the league. We'll get all into that. And of course, we'll talk about his disciples who are on the staff: Clint Hurtt, defensive line coach; Christian Parker, the cornerbacks coach; Joe Kasper, safety. We'll get into the entire staff and really talk about what we expect that to do, or what kind of impact that should have here in 2024 for the Philadelphia Eagles. So let's take a quick break and hear a word from our friends at Ocean Casino Resort in Atlantic City.
Go to get your game on. Go for the beers. Go for the cheers. Go for the hit and the hits. Go for the stakes and the stakes. Go to get your parlay on. Go to get your party on. Go for the scene. Go for the screens. Go for the gallery. Go for the win. Go to Ocean. Visit theoceanac.com to plan your visit.
All right. So Vic Fangio, this is not, for the young Eagles fan who may not know this is not Vic Fangio's first go-round in Philadelphia. Like, you may have heard that he's from, I guess, the Scranton area or Northeast PA.
Wilkes-Barre.
Wilkes-Barre area, right. So, but he coached here in the 80s, right? The mid 80s on the. Now I'm probably not old enough to remember this, and I'm not trying to.
Oh, I am.
You sound. Was it a Philadelphia combined Baltimore team, or did it move from Philadelphia to Baltimore?
No. Well, with later. So a couple things here. So he was a defensive assistant for the Philadelphia Stars. I was a season ticket holder in high school, so I love this team. The Doghouse team. People are over 50 remember this. Hey, I am. It was such incredible football, and Vic was very young then. Yeah, he was in his late 20s, early 30s, then, I think. And he worked under Jim Moore, who you mentioned. It's pretty cool that he would wind up working for Vic wind up working for Moore in New Orleans, and then in Indy. And then Bill Polian told me that. I said, man, Fangio's a pretty coach. Why didn't you bring him back? He goes, he couldn't run our system. He goes, he runs a 34. And he can't run Tony Dungy's Tampa 2 system. He can't do it. So they had to let him go. And Jim Moore wasn't happy about it. And there was a whole lot of it didn't kind of end well for Jim there with Indy. But in the end, it's kind of like when Jim Schwartz was with Buffalo. And I think, without looking this up, I think it was when maybe Rex Ryan came in. He can't run Ryan's defense. It's
Right.
completely different. So he couldn't stay.
Right. So that's where the roots of him as an NFL coach. This is back to the mid '80s. The Philadelphia Stars. The head coach was Jim Mora at the time. Yes, that Jim Mora, not Jim Mora Jr. The Jim Mora
Exactly.
Senior,
Sorry. Yeah.
who,
Exactly.
who we see all the time going playoffs,
He's
playoffs.
in his 90s. Can you believe? Let me double check that, but I
Amazing.
think he's around 90, which is hard to believe.
Right. And so you could see like where some of the concept comes from, because even remember Jim Mora Senior
89. Good.
being one of those front four rush guys, conservative defense, doesn't do a whole lot of exotic stuff, wants to build around the front four. And so, again, Vic Fangio, we talk about all the time, not a big, heavy blitz guy, likes to have a good front four rush. Jim would later go on to become the head coach, right, of the Saints in the late 80s, and he brought Vic with him to be the linebackers coach. So then Vic spent a couple of years being the linebackers coach. A defensive assistant in New Orleans, and then he became, I believe, a linebackers coach, right, with the Carolina Panthers, or no, linebackers coach with New Orleans, Carolina Panthers. He was
D coordinator. He was a D
D
coordinator.
coordinator, right, and that was under Dom Caper. Well, yeah, Capers was the head coach.
Correct. It was one of what happened. But what Polian told me was that ownership, because they wanted to sell seats, said, okay, let's not draft a lot of, because the expansion draft, you pick early, you're assigned, you can pick off, certain players that are not protected from other teams. And they went with a lot of older players who were kind of in the back nine. They weren't they were in the back nine, but they wanted to get things going quickly instead of building it slowly and just, going young. So they got a bunch of guys late in their career. Sam Mills, we remember in Philly, Montclair State, just a phenomenal football player, Hall of Famer. And Lamar Lathan and Kevin Green, they would get later on, and some younger players, Chad Cota, I remember this like it was yesterday, who joined Polian. Bill was the GM of the Panthers. He would bring some of those players over to Indy. They were unreal, man. They were like, it was just, I've never seen anything like this. It's kind of like in baseball, if you decide, okay, we're going to go for it. We're going to sign a lot of older arms and just go for it. Remember what the Marlins did when they won the World Series, when the Dutch Dalton, they signed all these old players.
Yep.
And then they got rid of everybody. They disbanded the team after they won the World Series.
That's right.
In a sort of odd way, they didn't do quite that, but they just went really old. And Vic got so much out of these guys, and it was pretty interesting. And then, and I don't know if this ever happened before, he's been the defensive coordinator with not just one expansion team, then two with the Texans.
Yeah.
Later on, they were really bad. Like Charlie Casserly, that team, they were terrible. People look at the rankings, yeah, they were bottom in a lot of stuff. Well, they had no talent. They didn't have Carolina's roster, which a bunch of guys at least have done it before. They were terrible. I went through. Seth Payne I know Seth. He was a nose tackle, not a bad player. Out of I think Cornell, but man, they had like they were bad for many years, and everybody knows about David Carr setting all sorts of sack records.
Right.
But it's hard to win without players, man. It's smoke and mirrors only work so much, and that's what happened there with Houston.
Well, and think about the interesting journey, right? So he follows Mora to the Saints, then he goes to work for Dom Capers with the Panthers, and then after the Panthers job, he was there for 3 years. He goes back with Mora with the Colts as defensive coordinator for 3 years. And then after that, as you mentioned, he goes to Houston where Capers is in 2002. So he's really, these are the two coaches, Jim Mora Jr. and Dom Capers, who are different styles. And Capers obviously was a big part of that Steelers defense in the 90s when he presided over it 3-4. So those are the two major coaches that people are familiar with that have had influence on what Vic Fangio is and what Vic Fangio or who Vic Fangio is as a coach. But obviously, as we'll get into, his defense has been modified quite a bit over the last few years for other reasons.
Yeah, one thing I do want to add. So with Capers, man, Vic has been with Capers with the Stars when Capers was the defensive backs coach. Then Dom went to New Orleans, and so did Fangio under Jim Mora, as you mentioned. Then Carolina, then Houston when Dom became the head coach of Houston as their first ever head coach. I mean, it's really remarkable how these guys follow each other, but they know each other and they know what to expect. There's healthy respect. These are some of the best, two of the best defensive minds in NFL history, quite frankly. Capers was a phenomenal defensive coach. Head coach, not so much, but as a defensive coach, pretty good.
Right. And obviously both those guys are 3-4 guys and have a lot of 3-4 coaching acumen. And then and that's how Vic started off, as a 3-4 guy. And really, when we talk about Fangio defenses now, we talk about the 5-2 front, or the 5-man front. Used to be called a 5-man tilted front. And that is a relatively new, in the grand scheme of things, implementation from Vic, basically as his way of countering the proliferation of the McVay Shanahan wide zone schemes. It was those schemes that were doing so well and were copycatted, and stretch zone left, stretch zone right, which was really a Mike Shanahan thing.
West Coast.
Yeah.
Yep.
So Vic's like, okay, well, we need more manpower. We need to redirect these outside runs back inside. So I'm going to bring an extra body down on the line of scrimmage. We're not going to have 4. We're not going to have 3 and 1. We're going to have 5, 3-2-2, or 4 and 1, however you want to do it. But we're going to have a 5-man front. And that has really worked. He has done well against many of these Shanahan or McVay style coach teams. There are also games he's lost against them, but in general, he's had success doing that, along with marrying his background as being a safeties guy, a linebackers guy, doing creative things on the background and playing a lot of too high. I think when we talk about the Eagles this year, we've seen the last 2 coordinators run the Fangio concept and start off too high, spin the safety down, show cover 1 after the snap. I'm going to think that you'll see that, but Vic has generally been a too high guy. He may start off cover 1 and then go back to 2, but he's a quarters, cover 4, too high base philosophy. What he does on third down will obviously change, but that is going to be the base philosophy because he wants to limit explosive plays.
Cover 4 is going to be, folks, 4 deep. You're going to see that this is his number one, usually, not always, but usually his number one zone is cover 4. So there are 2 things you see with Vic Fangio. Low blitz percentage, that never changes. They're going to be, you could bet the Eagles will be in bottom 10. Coverage after the snap, linebackers drop. Yes, they will drop. You're going to see the DNs drop. Draymond Jones, and what he does is Draymond Jones moved from inside he moved him from D tackle to DN in their front with Denver, and Draymond Jones' career took off. What other things? He moved Ahmad Brooks, who was a Mike linebacker for the Bengals. He moved him to a pass rushing role because he thought he could do it because he's a big dude for a Mike linebacker. So he moved him to a strong side linebacker with the Niners. That helped him take off. He does a key. I'll tell you what. Now talking to the Bears, there's someone with the Bears that from over the years with the Bears that Geoff and I know who said that probably, and this guy's been in the league probably 15 to 17 years, probably the smartest football coach he's ever been around. They called him savant. Akeem Hicks became a player. Kyle Fuller revived his career. Eddie Jackson, Bryce Callahan became one of the best nickel corners. I mentioned Draymond Jones. Justin Simmons became a stud under him. Kareem Jackson moved from corner to safety. He was a corner mostly with the Texans. Full-time safety, revived his career, kept it going, played well. Josie Jewell, when healthy, played well for Vic. There are plenty of other players, just a smattering of them that we can mention. Akeem Hicks, man, came out of nowhere. And I remember someone with the Bears telling me that when Vic's contract was up, it was before, let's say it was after the 17 season, maybe. His last year with them was 18. He was there for 4 years. They're like, we can't pay him enough. Like, they're like, whatever he wants, give it to him. Because the Desai was a guy that they liked, was a younger coach. It's like it's any the master of a scheme. Once you have it and it's special, you'll do anything to keep the guy. And I don't know what they paid him. I know that they basically said whatever he wants, they gave it to him. And it crushed their hearts when he got the Broncos head coaching job. They didn't think he was going to get it because, he's 65 now. So let's say he was in late 50s, but no one really ever thought of him as a head coach. And, he didn't have very much success there in Denver for whatever reason, but didn't have a quarterback. But the guy is really, really good. Not perfect. Nobody is. We know about the stuff that some of the Miami veterans didn't like him and all that. But he's had a ton of success. Carolina, huge success. Houston didn't have any players. It took them forever to get the defense right. It took them several drafts. Niners, phenomenal. Yes, he had players, but Aldon Smith was incredible with him. Justin Smith was wrapping up his career, was really good. We just mentioned Chicago. Miami got off to a good start. Then they started losing players. But here's the thing, though. Let's move this along here before we move to a Clint Hurtt. The thing that I'm curious about, because the Eagles have enough veterans, although they're getting younger. It wasn't that now the thing is there was a lack of discipline last year with the Eagles. There was not with Miami. Some of the players didn't like the way he handled them.
Mm-hmm.
I'm fascinated to see how Vic handles this group. I understand that Vic knows the team. He was around them in 2022. It was not last year, obviously, because he was coaching with Miami. I'm interested to see how he handles himself here. Does he adjust at all? He tried to act like he didn't know anything about that when the media asked him about what some of the players said. So I'm fascinated to see how everything goes here with him and the players.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think, this Eagles defense probably understood when all these changes happened after last year's collapse and Vic Fangio being brought back and hired as DC that they're not going to be running the show. They had a lot of voice in the Sean Desai defense, and there were a lot of veterans, and now Fletcher Cox isn't back, and now you have a new young guys. There's going to be one voice for this defense, and it's going to be Vic Fangio's. Now we'll see how that works. Whether that's either going to mean people are going to get on board or get out, or there's going to be bigger issues. I think things will be fine, but there's only going to be one voice, and that's what a defense needs. Really, it's okay to have a player feedback, but one voice and one message that we've talked about with all the disciples of Vic Fangio on this staff. That voice should be trickled down and heard from top to bottom. I do wanted to highlight what you said about Ahmad Brooks, and that's really interesting. And maybe, we've seen the seeds already sowed in those regards about Vic's ability to take linebackers and make them into pass rushers if they're not like the best coverage linebackers. And that might apply to someone like Devin White, who is very good in Tampa, because not just Ahmad Brooks, but, last year with what's his face?
Van Ginkel out of the blue.
Van
Ginkel.
Yeah. Van Ginkel. But even in Denver, and he didn't do it, but his disciple Ejiro Evero did the next year. Baron Browning from Ohio State, the guy had a tough rookie year. They turned him into a pass rusher the year later, and then he had 5.5 sacks. So this is something that Vic and his disciples have always figured out. And when we talk about Clint Hurtt, I'll give you another example where if they see that a linebacker has a pass rushing acumen, they'll use him as a blitzer, but it doesn't mean they increase their blitz percentage. It just means that guy comes and somebody else drops, and that's where we get into the sim pressure game.
Right. So innovation. I know that Fletcher Cox complained about the 4-eye technique, which is you're moving a little bit over when you play 4-eye, but the technique, as a former defensive lineman told me, the technique that you use with it is just not common. It's a little different. You have to get used to it. But once you get used, because remember when Gannon brought it in, Fletch didn't like it, but once over time they got on the same page, and you know what, folks, it wasn't a problem because Fletch played his ass off the last 2 years.
Right. Right. And for people who don't understand like the difference between 3, 4-eye, we'll put it this way. When you're a 3 technique, you shoot the gap, and Fletcher Cox really loves to shoot the gap because that's how you get right between the two linemen, and you're going right for the quarterback. That's what Jim Schwartz wants. Right to the quarterback, redirect the running back. When you're in the 4-eye, you're a little less in the gap, more head up, and you have to engage a blocker a little bit more head on, and that can slow your path to the quarterback. And that's why guys who like to rush the passer a lot, they don't want these obstacles in their way. So that's why they get a little angry about it.
Yeah. And this player told me that you have to I'll take what you said and take it to the next level. He said, you actually have to, not a swim move, but you have to engage and then go around. He said, it's hard.
Yep.
Because you have to learn the technique. And that brings us to Clint Hurtt, because we'll get into that and the technique.
Yes. Sure. Great job. Segue there. So let's talk about Clint Hurtt. This is a guy who he coached under Vic Fangio, I think, for the first time in Chicago.
Correct.
A couple of years ago when Vic was there. Man, so that means Sean Desai and Clint Hurtt and Vic Fangio were all on that staff, if I'm not mistaken. And even, I think the guy who's the Nickelbacks coach, is he still Ronell?
Ronell Williams.
Ronell Williams was, I think, like an assistant, something like a defensive quality coach guy on that staff.
So with Clint Hurtt, here's the big thing. He coached in college football for 9 years, played college football at Miami, coached there. been a long-time defensive line coach. He coached for Vic for Vic's first 2 seasons as an outside linebacker coach, by the way, 15 and 16. You might remember Pernell McPhee, Leonard Floyd. Willie Young came out of nowhere. Willie Young was sort of like a tweener edge rusher DN, long, explosive, but thinner maybe. I give Vic credit, and maybe might have been Hurtt because he coached the edge rushers, whatever. Willie Young came out of nowhere. Nothing. I remember talking to some personnel people in the league. They're like, "This I can't believe." One guy said to me, he goes, "Man, I got this wrong. I didn't think he had a chance." So that's good coaching.
Yeah.
By the Bears. Then that they got something out of these guys. Pernell McPhee, unfortunately, had a bunch of injuries, and Leonard Floyd's still going, by the way.
He is. He's a pretty good player. Where was he last year? Buffalo?
I think so. He's been with the Rams, and now is he with Washington? Did DQ bring him in?
I forget. Yeah, I
no,
think
that's
you're right
Dante
about that.
Fowler. Dante
No,
Fowler.
yeah. I do get those two guys confused.
Yeah, I know they're long.
I think he's with Buffalo.
Okay,
If I'm not mistaken. So we'll check that in a second. Yeah. Oh no, you know what? Is it the 49ers now?
Oh yes, you're correct. Because Cleveland Farrell, who played actually fairly well, as much as people Raider fans can't stand the guy, actually played fairly well. You're right. He was with Buffalo last year. He's going to start. Yeah, Leonard Floyd. But anyway, yeah. So Clint Hurtt is. You talk to any coaches and personnel people, one of the most respected defensive line coaches in the NFL. The fact that he's coached for Vic, he knows exactly what Vic wants. He knows the techniques. They'll be different probably from what he taught in Seattle, but it doesn't matter because he knows what Vic wants. So they'll teach it here. If there's any adjustment from the way that they were coaching under the what was the guy's name who's now with Tennessee, or he moved on?
Bowen?
Tracy Rocker.
Rock. I'm sorry. Yeah,
right. So talking to our someone with the Seahawks, tough love coach, but puts his arm around the players. Players love him. He's just a disciplined, coaches hard type of guy, but guys respond to him. He's still young enough to be able to reach players. And the guy I spoke with said that this is a hell of a hire for Philly. So this is it'd be stunning if it doesn't work very well here. And the cool thing is here, he's got guys to develop. They're not a bunch of veterans who don't need coaching at this point. I mean, you're talking Jordan Davis and Jalen Carter, PJ Musfer, Marlon Tui. There are no vested veterans on the defensive line, which is unheard of.
Right.
So they all got further development to make.
Adam, I was looking at the Seahawks defensive metrics last year, and something really jumped out at me that I think is encouraging about Clint Hurtt. At least from as you just said, developing talent, being able to understand how linemen should generate pressure. Last year, he was the defensive coordinator for the Seahawks. It was his first year as a coordinator. They finished 25th overall, which is not great. They blitzed at about 22% of the time, which is very Fangio-esque. You're right around 20 to 22%. That's the Fangio range, which is not a whole lot, right? But despite finishing 25th overall on defense and not blitzing very much, they were 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
It's actually a second year, just so you know. It was
I'm sorry. You're right. Second year. I meant to say second year. They were 8th. They had the 8th best pressure rate in the NFL and the 9th best hurry percentage in the NFL. So they were top 10 in some really important pressure generation stats, situational stats, despite not blitzing very much and despite overall not being a great defense, finishing 25th overall. Well, I think that they were pretty banged up in the back end at times, like Witherspoon.
They were a corner.
Yeah.
But my only concern is Draymond Jones is making a ton of money.
Mm-hmm.
And he really has not put up the sack numbers that they were expecting. I mean, it was only 1 year.
Right.
Now, sacks are only one thing. He had 12 quarterback hits.
Not bad. Right.
It's not bad, but I thought with what they were paying him, they expected more. I get it was 1 year, and obviously Hurts moved on.
Correct.
So he wasn't a super. See, the thing about Draymond Jones is because he had positional versatility, whether he could play tackle or end.
Mm-hmm.
And he's got length. He's got high energy, good player. But maybe the expectations were a little bit too much. Who knows?
It's possible. Who led them? Oh, Jaron Reed had a pretty good year. I know. Yeah,
Jaron Reed. Yeah,
Jaron Reed. Yeah, 12 quarterback hits, 7 sacks. One thing that stood out that I wanted to mention, and it follows along that line, we talked about linebackers who Fangio and his disciples, if they think you can rush the passer, they'll use you. Is Jordan Brooks last year at 4.5 sacks, which is way more than I think it was more than his first 3 years combined. So Clint Hurtt must have felt like he had an opportunity to use, maybe because he wasn't getting what he wanted out of Draymond Jones, like you said, and not enough rush, that he used Brooks in a role like that.
Oh,
And
you know why? You know
Mhm.
why? Because Uchenna Nwosu, who's terrific,
Yes.
he missed half the season. That was it. What? Because as soon as you said that, I'm like, wait a minute, who are they
Mhm.
missing? Nwosu, who I loved, who was long. I don't know why the chart. For some reason, Brandon Staley didn't want him. That was stupid. That was a bad mistake.
Right.
He's been a great story, and yeah, you lose your best edge rusher, it's going to be a problem. I mean, it's they have Leonard Williams, John Reed, as you mentioned.
Yep. Boy,
Uh,
Mafe had a nice little season. He wound up having 9 sacks in his second
Mafi's a good
year.
player, yeah,
Yeah,
but boy,
second round
Mafi's a good
pick.
player. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So they had some issues on the back end, and Jamal Adams. I mean, they had to play him because he was under contract, but he's just not a player anymore. He's now with Tennessee. So just getting back to this. So look, this is a hell of a hire, and obviously he's here because of Vic. So I'm very interested to see how he coaches, man. I've never really studied him when I've gone to their training camps. So I mean, I've heard about him and talked to people who work with him, but really
Mhm.
interested to see what this looks like in training camp.
All right, so let's move on to the other defensive line coach. He's actually the edge rushers or what do you call it? Overhang player?
Overhang players, right?
Overhang player coach.
Well, he has all the edge rushers. I mean,
Yeah.
that's really what he does. Jeremiah Washburn, yes.
Right. Jeremiah Washburn, who's been with the organization for quite a while. I just think I'm fascinated by him because he was a scout, then he was a coach. Everybody knows the Washburn name from his dad being the godfather of the wide nine. But Jeremiah started off as an offensive line coach, not a defensive line coach, if I'm not mistaken.
Correct.
So,
Correct.
yeah. And then at one point, he was the Eagles director of player personnel. Like they've just taken this guy and Swiss Army knifed the heck out of him. And I almost don't know what to make of his Eagles career.
It's been mixed because if you remember, Sirianni said that because he was sort of like a assistant coach / personnel director, because he had to make a choice. It was one or the other. He couldn't do both anymore, and he chose to be a defensive coach. And he's been in charge of the edge rushers. This will be his third year doing it. 2021, he was a senior defensive assistant, personnel director, did advanced projects early, and then his first 7 years of coaching with the Lions, then Miami and Chicago. Miami twice, by the way, 2 separate times, was assistant L coach and offensive line coach. So look, the thing here, but the thing that helps him is he knows both sides of the football.
Right.
So that'll help him, and we'll see how this goes. But like 22, obviously, I mean, he deserves credit because he's in charge of them. This was his 70 sack year. It was much more than that. It was just Reddick was incredible. They were phenomenal. But then last year, the lack of discipline. This is a Desai issue. This is everybody on that staff issue. So they got to get things back together. Washburn's got a job ahead of him. This is I get it that Vic Fangio is here and Clint Hurtt are here. I get that. That's going to help them. But Washburn specifically is responsible for the edge rushers. Sweaty dropped off significantly. Nolan Smith, I get it, was a rookie, wasn't expected to play much. Reddick wasn't quite as good as the year before. Still good, but not quite as good. So Washburn's got to get these guys back on the ball here.
And think about this. Here's where I think this might be, I don't want to say fish out of water, but like a really interesting assignment for Jeremiah, because obviously being the son of Jim Washburn, Jeremiah's pass rush influence is wide 9, go attack the quarterback, go attack the quarterback. But his job now, he has to work with edge rushers who are going to be asked to drop into coverage at times. They're going to be important times. They may only be 3 to 4 to 5 times a game, but you have to know where to be, your landmarks, how to do that. And Jeremiah Washburn is not necessarily a 3-4 outside linebacker coach. And this is the guy who this is the guy who's going to spend the most amount of time with the edge rushers as their position coach. And he's got to teach that. Of course, Vic does, and it's trickled down, but I mean, he is the position coach. And I don't know what his sort of background on teaching edge rushers where to drop and how to drop and have that instinct and intuition the way, let's say, like just to throw out like a Kevin Green from the Steelers would, right? Or may he rest in peace. I believe he's passed, right?
Correct.
To use a more recent example, who's the James Harrison, right? If James Harrison was coaching outside linebackers and touch rush and drop and things like that, or even JJ Watt, but that's not really where Jeremiah's dad's background is, or even his background. So I just wonder like how he sort of conveys that kind of coaching.
Good point. I mean, we'll have to see. We'll have to see. But look, he's done it. But Washburn's done it before. It's just so it could be a little different because Vic's it's now here, and Vic will have different. He'll. It's one thing to say, okay, Gannon coached the scheme here. Decide coach the scheme here, but this is the guy. This is the father of the Vic Fangio defense, Vic.
Yeah.
So that's the thing, and I'm just interested. There's a lot we don't know. Like we think we know because Vic's coming in here, he's going to run a scheme. There'll be little small differences from the way he was coached before, but the skeleton of the scheme is exactly the same. It's just the way that Vic wants it done might be a little different because the father of any scheme, offense or defense, always does it a little differently than the disciples. So we'll see what happens, but it's a big year. And as I mentioned in passing here, they've got Bryce Huff, who now is a full-time player, and I'm gonna tell you, right now Jeremiah Washburn's got a big job on his hands because 22. I mean, he probably could have run for mayor of that coaching staff, but now he's got a lot of work to do here.
100%. All right, we'll move on to the next coach. Before we do that, Adam, the MLB All-Star Game is in the books now, and the Phillies are still the hottest ticket in town. I don't know if people realize this, but the Phillies at home this year are 37-16, and that is by far, not only is that the best record in Major League Baseball at home, but the next best team only has 30 wins at home. So they are crushing it at home. So you want to go see the Phillies at home. And you know who's going to help you do that? Our friends at Game Time, the Game Time app. It's the authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball. It makes getting tickets faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app, they go down the closer it gets to the first pitch, which is just unbelievable. We have told you about their amazing last-minute deals, their all-in prices, how you can see your seat on the app. You get their perfect view, and, of course, their lowest price guarantee. So I'm thinking get on the Game Time now, Game Time app now. Find some of the next home games coming up for the Phillies, because if you're going to spend a lot of money on a game, it sucks when you spend a lot of money, especially football, right? And your team loses or they lose 6-7. You're like, I just dropped like my future kids' college education on a couple of games here and they went 0 for 4. That sucks, but you don't have to worry about that with the Phillies. You're almost guaranteed a win with how well that they've been playing at home. So Game Time can help you do that. They've got the zone deals, the flash deals, very easy to find the ticket for the event. And by the way, you don't have to just go see the Phillies. They've got concerts, comedy shows, theater, anything like that. Anything that has tickets, you can find Game Time app for. We told you about the lowest price guarantee. If you find a lower price somewhere else, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. That's why Game Time's the best. So take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code BIRDS for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create and redeem the code BIRDS, BIRDS, to get $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. And if you do that and you get this great discount with Birds, make sure you tweet it out there. Thank Game Time. They got a Twitter account. You could say, hey, I listened to at Inside the Birds and got my tickets through Game Time. We know some other people have recently said that they heard other advertisers on our platform for different things, and then tweeted at that advertiser and Inside the Birds, and it's just like a match made in heaven. So feel free to do that and say you heard it here at Inside the Birds on Twitter or X, whatever they're calling it these days.
Yeah.
X, yeah. All right, so continuing to talk about this defensive coaching staff, let's move on to the inside linebackers. Now, their coach for this, Adam, I believe is the only new coach that does not have experience, only incoming coach that doesn't have experience with Vic Fangio. Is that correct?
Well, Ronell Williams never worked with him. He came in. He knows the scheme. He came in after Vic left.
So he wasn't on that Bear staff.
Correct.
Right.
Correct.
You're right. He was after.
But he knows the scheme. He knows the scheme. Now, Bobby King, but he's still coaching a 34 for a lot of his career. He's an inside. In fact, he's probably one of the better inside backer coaches in the league. Zach Cunningham flourished big time with him. And another cool story is someone reminded me, Jack Gibbons. He's a guy that most people have never heard of. He's an undrafted free agent. He made the Titans roster in 22, became a starter as an inside backer under this coach, Bobby King. You might remember Bernardrick McKinney as another inside linebacker, did very well for a while
Yeah.
under Bobby King for the Texans. Then his career completely fell off, and he's been done for a couple of years. So just some of the players that he's coached.
Wasn't McKinney and Zach Cunningham together at one point?
Yes, with Houston. Yep.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah. Interesting. Well, he's got, you talked about the job that faces Jeremiah Washburn. Obviously, Bobby King. I mean, you've got Nakobe Dean coming off the injuries. You've got this test that they're doing with Zach Bond to see if he can play the position, and then Devin White trying to rebound from a pretty tough year last year in Tampa. Ben Van Sumeren, who's got to get coached up. So he literally has the whole gamut of young kid, veteran. A guy like third-year pro like Nakobe Dean. He's got a lot of different guys to coach up in that room.
He does. This is a big deal, man. This is, we're doing on Monday when our training camp preview drops. I mean, this is, we'll probably do a top 10 list of storylines for training camp for the first time in I don't know how long. The inside backer positions are both open, no matter what anyone tells you. As we understand, they're both open.
Mm-hmm.
The Devin White should be a favorite to start one of them. It's not a lock. He's got to show he can do the job and be consistent in training camp. I mean, they've got a lot of talent there. It's not great, but it's better than what they had last year.
Right.
And there's going to be competition. So you're right. This is actually something very interesting to watch in training camp. And they needed a veteran coach. It didn't work bringing these college coaches in last year. That was a mistake, and it's been corrected. And they've got guys who've done it. I mean, this is by the way, Bobby King, now in his 15th year as an assistant coach in the National Football League with Dallas, Houston 2 separate times, with the Chargers when they were in San Diego, and with the Titans most recently.
Wow. Who's the longtime veteran coach that Andy brought in at the end and it didn't work out? And, obviously the whole staff got changed, but then he went to Kansas City and coached linebackers there.
Tommy Brazier?
No, it's more of an inside linebacker coach. Why can't I think? He's been coaching them in Kansas City. He just recently retired, I think, after this season or.
Oh, the guy who won it out. The guy who won it out.
Yes, he won. Yes. Yeah.
I could see him in front of me.
Me too.
I know the story. We gave the 411 on that when it happened.
Yeah.
I can't. Pissing me off. Yeah, go ahead.
I'll tell you. I'll get it. Ken Flagioli. Ken Flagioli.
Yes.
Right.
Good call.
Right.
Yeah.
And I only say this reminds me because Ken had a lot of years experience when he came to the Eagles, and it didn't work out for reasons beyond Ken Flagioli. But, Bobby King, at least if you're going to go and get a guy who's not familiar with you're able to get a guy who has 15 years of an experience in the NFL. This is not like what they did at wide receivers coach, pulling guys from the college ranks, hoping it was going to work out.
Ken Flagioli was with Spags with the Rams.
Yep. He
was with, I'm going to say Carolina.
Wasn't he also in Washington at one point with Haslett?
When you say Haslett, you mean Ron Rivera?
No, Jimmy Haslett coached in Washington. Didn't like in the mid-2000s.
He might have been, yeah, but he wasn't the head coach, was he?
No, I'm saying he was the defensive coordinator.
Oh, D coordinator, maybe. Yeah. I don't know if he was or not, but I do know that I'm fairly certain without looking it up that he was with the Panthers, Flagioli, and he was with the Super Bowl under Ron Rivera. I think I know he was on the Panthers staff and had some success. But anyway, on your point, Bobby King, this is what you do. This is an important position for them. They got to get better play. As Joe Banner told us, the former Eagles president, despite everyone pinning it on him, he never said you have to have weakness. He just said that you might have a position that's not quite as good as the others. Literally, linebacker was one they didn't invest a lot, but he never said it's acceptable to be bad or below average. He never felt that way. That was a misnomer. But because people equated money with, okay, well, if you're not spending money, they have to suck. No, that's not the point.
No,
they just didn't draft well enough. That I would say clearly didn't draft well enough.
100%. All right, so as we move to the back end, last year the Eagles had a nickelbacks coach for the first time, Ronell Williams. We've mentioned him. I don't know if you can blame it all on him, but obviously the Nickels did not play well last year. I mean, there were about 700 different.
They got hurt. I mean,
they were all getting hurt, or they were like rookie free agents and never had experience, and it was a disaster. But either way, Ronell Williams gets to keep a job with the Eagles, but he is no longer in charge of nickels. He is now the assistant linebackers coach. He's a young kid. I feel like it's better for him to be an assistant behind a veteran guy like Bobby King, and then, he'll get to come up in his own. So obviously Vic saw something in him to keep him on the staff.
Yeah, I mean, he was with that. At least he knows the scheme.
Right.
Although he didn't coach with Vic technically. Now, the cool thing is, if I have the right guy here, I think I do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he actually went to Westchester University.
Yep.
From Chester, PA. I also coached at Widener.
Yep.
He coached a little bit in college football. I mean, as you said, he's a very young coach. It gives him a chance to work his way up here. And he doesn't, because he's not the Nichols coach, he doesn't have quite the responsibility he used to have. So he kind of rebuild things, work his way up here and see what happens.
There you go. All right. To the back end, the new defensive backs coach. This guy comes with a lot of promise, at least a lot of fanfare. Sean Payton was highly praiseworthy of him. Interestingly, though, he did not retain him, but he was highly praiseworthy of Christian Parker, who was really only with Vic Fangio for 1 year. 2021, Vic got fired at the end of the year, and Christian Parker was retained and was there for 3 years. So Vic brings him back. I think this is a good get for Vic. And listen, I'm not going to. He's considered a promising young coach. Who knows? But I think it's good for Vic because, as we've talked about a lot, Adam, it's really hard to get guys when you get hired, right? You got to find guys who are either not under contract or being allowed to get out of their contract, and you don't always get your guys for a lot of reasons. So for Vic to be able to get a guy who at least has 1 year of experience with him and who people like, and even the former coach Sean Payton had nice words to say about him, that's better than kind of looking out there at the scrap heap saying, I got no options. I got to pull this guy from the college ranks who's never coached in the NFL, or this guy who's, on a different team every year.
Right. So if you look at Parker's career, 3 years with the Broncos as DB's coach, 1 with Vic, as you said, Packers defensive quality control coach for 2 years before that. And then he spent 6 years in college football. The term that I was given, thought to be a rising star in the coaching community. This is from 2 or 3 coaches that know him and respect him. And look, what we call, when we've heard not great things about a coach, we said it. Or when a guy hasn't done well enough, we've called it out from our sources. So, I mean, we got it from 3 different coaches. One who worked with him, I believe in Denver, spoke pretty highly of him. So he goes, look, he's a young guy who's working his way up, and we'll see what happens here. But so his title is passing game coordinator. He's in charge overall of the defensive backs. Then there's another corner. Then now they have another. In fact, they have a bunch of DBs coaches, as a matter of fact.
Yeah. Just one last thing on Parker. We had heard, just looking into certain things in the offseason, that Patrick Surtain, who's a 2-time All-Pro, liked being coached by Christian Parker. So I think that's good when your star player who's developed into a 2-time All-Pro. I mean, you can argue, hey, he was a top 10 pick. He should have been an All-Pro. Well, not all of them become All-Pros. A lot of top 10 picks don't pan out, especially at that position. Patrick Surtain did pan out, and we had heard that he did like playing for Christian Parker. So always good. Obviously he's got to coach Darius Slay and all these new kids.
Well, think about it. Let's just say he had a personality conflict. Let's say the player didn't like him, and we heard that. I mean, that wouldn't be good. So yeah, right. That's a good note, because also it's not like you can roll guys out there. Oh, they don't need any coaching. They just let them do it themselves. I mean, I always laugh when someone will say, well, he was a great player coming in, so he didn't need it. He was going to be great anyway. No, that's not true. I mean, do you think Tom Brady's always pointed out to Dick Rabine, the late quarterbacks coach, when he passed away very early in Tom's career, one of the most influential coaches that he had in his career. I mean, you may have come in, and obviously he was a 6th-round pick, and there was reason for it, but coaching matters, and that don't let anyone fool you. Coaching absolutely matters.
Yeah, 100%. All right, so continuing on the back end, the Eagles now have a new cornerbacks coach, because technically Christian Parker is D-back. He's the bigger umbrella coach, defensive backs coach / pass game coordinator. So Roy Anderson, who was with Clint Hurtt last year in Seattle, he was the secondary coach, now comes in to coach cornerbacks for the Eagles. And again, I like it because, and I'm trying to be objective here, as we always do, but what I like about it is you're talking about a guy who's in his 15th year coaching in the NFL. And I can't underscore, I'm not trying to rip the organization, but I keep bringing up how sometimes they pluck guys from the college ranks to coach wide receivers year after year, and it wasn't working out. It's good to at least get some veterans here who have been through, they know how to coach guys. It's 15 years in the business.
Yeah, and that's what I was saying earlier, that the mistake last year was having all these college guys, and it's just, and then, I heard from another coach who said, he told me that, we're not going to see who the coach was. He goes, he could not believe that the Eagles hired him. He goes, this guy should be a college coach. He's not NFL worthy. And we would find out later what would happen. So, yeah, with Roy Anderson, the cool thing is like you look at Seattle last year, very early, boy, in the mid to early 2000s, actually mid 2000s, with Baltimore for a bunch. You love that he was with them. Safeties with the Niners and Colts. With Vic in 17-18 as assistant DBs coach, so he knows the scheme. Work with safeties for 3 seasons with the Vikings and secondaries coach last year. So you're right. I mean, this is his 16th year in the NFL, 15th in coaching. He actually worked in personnel in his first year in the NFL in 05.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, boy, for the most part, this is a very veteran defensive staff. I like that.
Listen, if the Eagles ever needed it,
yeah, 100%.
If there was one area of the team that needed some guys who've got some seasoning to them in coaching, yeah, it was the back end of the defense. Yes, so that leads us to the safeties coach, Joe Kasper, who, interesting story because he was with the Eagles, right, 2 years ago. And that's where Vic got to observe him working. He was a defensive quality control guy with the Eagles when they went to the Super Bowl. And then when Vic got the job in Miami, he plucked it. It's weird. It's the weirdest poaching you ever see. Vic wasn't coaching for the Eagles, but he poached an Eagles coach to go with him in Miami.
And again, Vic was not technically working for the team, but he was around the club a ton in 22, a lot.
Right.
Yes, he got hired technically as a consultant for the playoffs, I guess.
Right.
But he was around, as we reported at the time, he was around the team. It might have been every couple weeks. I get it. He's from out this way. I know he became tight with Howie and Nick, which is kind of odd. But he obviously got to know Joe Kasper. And interesting, I talked to John D. Filippo about him because I've noticed in his background. I go, hey, were you with Joe Kasper? He goes, oh, yeah. This kid's really sharp. I'm like, wow. He goes, he's with David Cutcliffe, the Duke head coach, who's one of the coached Peyton Manning at University of Tennessee. I'm like, wow, okay. So, and then he coached safeties. He did coach. He did coach a little bit, yeah, as you said, with Vic in Miami. He also coached a little bit in college football. So, yeah, and Vic, on your point, I mean, the fact that he brought him, he really must have thought a lot of him. And I think, didn't you have a nugget for us months ago when the Eagles, we had heard behind the scenes they were going to hire him as safeties coach? Or we didn't know it was going to be we heard DBs. We assumed it'd be safeties because he just did it with Miami. Did you have a note about how, didn't the organization here feel pretty good about him?
Yeah, they really liked him. In fact, even if Vic Fangio wasn't here, if I imagine they would have tried to get Joe Kasper if the Dolphins were going to reshape their staff like they did, right? Okay. Because who did they hire as their defensive coach? I forget, their coordinator.
Anthony Weaver, I believe.
Right, from Baltimore, right?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, and they brought in some new guys around him. So, like, let's say Kasper and Weaver just decided, like, this is not, I'm not your system, you're not my system, whatever. It wouldn't have surprised me if Kasper would have figured his way back to Philadelphia because I know they liked him. They did not want to lose him.
There you go. So they obviously saw something in him that's pretty good. So, yeah, and it's crazy. I mean, you look at it: safeties, corners, DBs. That I guess they technically don't have a nickels coach. I think.
Yeah, I don't think. I mean, at this point, you've got a cornerbacks coach and a defensive backs coach.
You would think Roy Anderson would handle that. We'll look into it to see if they're differentiating the roles. And then finally, Tyler Scudder. You might remember.
Before we get to Tyler Scudder, we got one more pause to hear from our friends at Sky Motor Cars.
Sky Motor Cars in Westchester is a different sort of dealership. All it takes is one look at their Highline pre-owned vehicles that people all over the country want and need. Owner Brett Schiller, make sure you don't spend a dime of your money before you purchase the car. Sky Motor Cars allows you to make all the decisions regarding your next vehicle. At Sky Motor Cars, you never have to spend more than necessary. Visit SkyMotorCars.com today or call 610-918-7225.
And if you happen to go to Sky Motor Cars out there in Westchester, PA, make sure you tell them Adam and Geoff sent you. You will get a great deal. If not, just visit them at SkyMotorCars.com.
And Brett Scholder, we were able to see him, the owner of Sky Motor Cars, at Josh Weinfeld's wedding. Good to see him. And Brett is a pickleball guy. Which
is he? Oh, we're gonna have to get a game going.
Do you play pickleball?
I just started.
Really?
I don't know if I'm any good because I'm playing against people who just started.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. Jeez. I did not know that. That's interesting.
I feel like pickleball is for failed tennis players.
Well,
Or
it's
bad
interesting. No,
racquetball players.
it's generally seen as older players, but the best pickleball player in the country is actually I was reading a story on him. Guy played tennis at University of Maryland, I think.
Hmm.
For some reason, I don't know why he picked it up. And Jack Sock, the former really good, funny name, Jack Sock,
Yeah.
former pretty good pro player, he's now playing pickleball. I don't know why, but it's interesting. And some of the tennis clubs now are only pickleball because everybody seems to want to play it. It's swept the country.
It is definitely the new rave. I bet you in 5 years nobody's playing pickleball, but
I doubt that. I doubt because older players,
I feel
older
like it's the
people.
rave. It's the
Well, no,
new
but here's
thing.
why. If you
Uh-huh.
can't run anymore, because you just move in short space. I've done it twice. I didn't
Right.
really enjoy it, but I get it why it's competitive. But at a tennis club I belong to, it's unreal. I mean, I see people in the 70s and 80s playing, and they're getting after it. I'm like, wow, okay.
We'll see. I feel like it's gonna go the route of like highlight. Everybody's doing that in the late 80s and 90s.
Hyla, holy smokes.
Racquetball. Does anybody ever go to the club and play racquetball
People still
anymore?
play, or the other thing that's super cool is padel. It's I'm too old for it.
Uh-huh.
It's crazy. There's a door that's open. It's glass. It's a glass enclosed arena court, and it's all glass. And they actually, I don't know why they have a door, but I think they keep the door. But if someone plays padel, they could correct me if they want.
Uh-huh.
But it's the craziest thing. I watched the guy go out the door and hit the ball. I'm like, what the hell? Super cool though. Hit
Hey,
off the
you
wall.
you you want to know what sport I really want to get into?
All right.
I watch people play it here where I live, all around the fields, right? And I'm like, oh my God, they're having so much fun. And I do love baseball, and it's not baseball, but cricket. Have you ever watched people play
Really?
cricket? It just looks so fun and so
Well, I know it's in the
active.
Olympics, right? But I'm trying to think if we ever seen it. No, I don't. Is it? Wait a minute. So you're saying around where you are in South Jersey, they have it, huh?
Yeah, I see it all the time. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
I've
People
never.
playing cricket.
I mean, I see. Well, okay. Is that because I'm so stupid? I don't. I'm trying to figure this one out. Is that the? Is cricket? Okay. What's the one with
It,
that's polo? What is
no,
cricket?
it's like baseball, but played with
That
a
scooper?
short oar instead of a
Okay.
baseball bat.
Okay.
And you get to
Cricket.
throw the ball like a pitcher, but you get to like running start and you kind of get to fling it. I mean, I haven't like
Wow.
sat down and watched a lot like 10 minutes straight, but every time I pull up for softball, both my girls play softball and they're playing cricket, it's like there's so much
Wow.
like activity and excitement and the ball you see getting bounced everywhere. I'm
Wow.
like, this looks
Now
really
you're
fun.
now you're gonna get me to go to YouTube after this and look it
Oh
up.
yeah.
But actually, later today, I got a golf event, and I should mention, just give a little promo for it for Mid-Penn Bank,
Hmm.
their annual for breast cancer research, and you could follow it, and because Brandon Graham's playing it and
Nice.
so is Kenny Pickett and Saquon Barkley, who's a big golf guy. Look forward to talking to him.
That doesn't surprise me. Penn State people, aristocrats. We play golf.
There you go. There you go.
All right. Let's finish off this defensive coaching staff. We'll talk about Tyler Scudder, who he has been with the coaching staff, I think, since 2021, right? Yeah.
Yep.
Another guy who the organization quietly, like you hear his name, when we go to the combine or the senior board events, we're like, hey, Tyler Scudder. Kind of like this guy.
This is Nick's guy. So because
Yeah.
of Sirianni's connection with Iowa State and a bunch of their coaches there, so he knew who Tyler Scudder was. So he brought him in as his coaching assistant, and then he got moved to defensive assistant 2 years ago, and then assistant LBs last year. Now he's defensive quality control. So we'll see because they changed their defense around with the staff. So he's still with them, and as you said, they thought of him enough to keep him with a defensive staff that's kind of almost all changed.
Yeah, that is it. All right, so that rounds out the new defensive staff. I think this is going to be a fascinating year, and just observe and watch how it all manifests. Certainly, everybody will be keyed into it once training camp begins, and training camp begins next week on Tuesday. That means our next podcast, which comes out Monday the 22nd, will be our training camp preview, and we will turn the page to season 7 of Inside the Birds. And of course, with that is going to come a big Patreon relaunch that we've been telling you about. So there will be more information on that on the 22nd, Monday. That'll come out. And we look forward to going full steam ahead with Philadelphia Eagles coverage. That's going to do it for this edition of Inside the Birds. the leading podcast in Eagles intel. And as always, we thank you for flying with us inside the birds. Be sure to check out our friends at phlsportsnation.com. They're enhancing the fans' experience with their coverage of all Philadelphia sports teams. For the fan, by the fan is their motto. So make sure you check them out at phlsportsnation.com and on Twitter at phlsportsnation.